The 2024 hurricane season was predicted to be hyperactive, but as we head towards the peak of the season, the Atlantic appears completely quiet. What's wrong with the tropics? In this video, we'll see what's happening or not happening with the tropics and if things are about to change dramatically. So, as you can see, the Atlantic is completely quiet. On the satellite image, nothing. No tropical anything. But in the Pacific, there actually are several systems. So that's kind of interesting. And the NHC has no tropical cyclone activity expected in the next 48 hours on the Atlantic side of things. And then nothing even in the next 7 days. But guess what? The Pacific has two storms. We have Hurricane Gilma, which is a Category 3 hurricane, and then Tropical Storm Hector. These are really not going towards any land, so except maybe Gilma might try to reach Hawaii, but as not much of anything. But Hawaii actually did just get hit with a hurricane, Hurricane Hone. It's 80 miles an hour. Now it's moving away from the big island of Hawaii, but they did get, a lot of strong winds, power outages, and flooding. And then this kind of goes west as a tropical storm. It could stay a Category 1 hurricane for the next few hours before going back down to a tropical storm, and then it kind of just heads west, away from all land areas, pretty much. And so, not other than the Pacific is kind of active, but the Atlantic is completely quiet, which is actually interesting because earlier in the season, there was pretty much nothing in the Eastern Pacific, but the Atlantic was actually pretty active. And right now, the Atlantic is pretty much highly unfavorable for any development, according to this Tropical Intensity Index map. Pretty much highly unfavorable for anything. And part of that, there is still a lot of Saharan dust, so that could have something to do with it. That does have something to do with it, kind of interfering with some of these tropical waves. So as soon as that dust really goes away, for the most part, then we could probably start to see a lot more activity. But in the Pacific, yeah, it is pretty active there. Pretty much, there's Hurricane Gilma, there's Tropical Storm Hector, and actually, interestingly enough, nothing really behind those systems. So that could be it for the Pacific as well for a while. And then we have Hurricane Hone, that's kind of, that also kind of goes away. So pretty much not a whole lot of activity even in the Pacific. And the Atlantic is going to be inactive. You see, there's still a lot of that dust, but then in the dry air, but then it goes away. But still, the GFS is not showing anything. It shows moisture. You could see there's tropical waves and all that, but nothing really organizing into an actual tropical system on the GFS model, even by September 2nd, September 3rd, and still all the way to September 10th, which is the peak of hurricane season, still a whole bunch of nothing. And then the AI Euro model actually still shows not much activity, but then you start trying to see some activity close to the Gulf Coast and the southeastern U.S. by September 4th, even going into September 5th. Part of this looks like it might try to quickly develop before maybe turning into an extra tropical system by September 6th. So the AI Euro is showing a little bit of activity, but not really a whole lot of tropical storms. The regular Euro model also shows a whole bunch of nothing, except, still maybe a tropical wave off the southeastern U.S. that could turn into a tropical storm, maybe. The CMC model also shows a whole bunch of nothing. So that doesn't look promising for, an active hurricane season. But what about the ensembles? The GEFS is actually showing, really, as soon as we go into September, the GEFS is showing more activity. So it actually shows, a tropical system trying to form by, September 1st, September 2nd, maybe a tropical depression or a tropical storm, and then you have also some weak activity behind that near Cape Verde. And then, this continues going west, and then it intensifies by September 5th. This starts really, you start seeing a lot more potential activity. And, it could go anywhere from maybe into the Caribbean to just way out in the middle of nowhere. So a huge area of potential activity on the ensembles, just not on the operational model. So there is actually, some potential activity that, it could potentially get active. And this is another look at the GEFS showing the ensemble member pressure. And it does show, a lot of low pressure systems, tropical cyclones in the Atlantic by September 5th. It really heats up. So that's, something interesting to see that, maybe there is a potential activity as soon as we go into September. And, we'll just have to see. But the previous run shows all that activity, and then this actually extends even further out. Potentially, a lot of activity from like September 5th all the way to, maybe September 14th. Then it looks like it tones down a little bit, and then start getting, maybe more potential activity towards the end of September. On the previous, the 0Z run from yesterday, the Euro ensembles are showing not a whole lot, but then it's, going again. This is now both models are starting to show potential activity from, as soon as we go into September. So September 1st, September 2nd, then, start seeing more activity, especially in this area, kind of going along the northeastern Caribbean. Also potentially, it could turn into a fish storm. It could turn out into the middle of nowhere. And then also some potential activity, closer to the Gulf Coast. And then there's the Global Tropics Hazards Outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. And this was from August 20th. They were showing a high chance, over a 60% chance of something forming between August 28th and September 3rd. And those, a lot of the ensembles were showing that, and then it kind of toned down. But now they've actually kind of brought some activity back. So, potentially a storm here. And then September 4th to September 10th, week 3, a potential storm, a 40% chance of potential tropical cyclone formation there. And then even a 20% chance in the Eastern Pacific, but less activity there. Now it looks like the Atlantic could start to get active in September. And that would make sense, and that should happen, because September's the peak month for hurricane activity, pretty much. And the interesting thing is that MJO, this is the MJO, it's showing that, right now it's pretty unfavorable over the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. So not a lot of activity there, but then it starts turning more towards neutral. Especially, it's still slightly unfavorable over the Eastern Pacific for August 30th and September 4th. But then, over the Atlantic, it looks slightly favorable to neutral. And then it's neutral for both the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic for the entire September. For the entire month of September, it's pretty much neutral there, even though over Africa it's not really super favorable. So, except August 30th, that's where, it is favorable over there, but then it starts getting neutral to unfavorable later into September, so that could be a problem for activity. But it does show, even towards the end of September, then it starts getting more favorable over the Western Caribbean, the Gulf. So yeah, September could definitely heat up, and this is going in neutral to slightly favorable all the way into early October. So, it might start getting active and just keep going once we can get a couple storms out there. There should be a big increase climatologically. There should be an increase in activity. Pretty much, right now we should be really going up in activity, but this doesn't always happen exactly like this. This is just the average, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it starts really getting active, towards early to mid-August. Sometimes it's later, like early September, and so we'll have to see what happens. But right now it's pretty quiet, and it's like, oh, is anything going to happen? But I think it will heat up in September. That, at least that's what should happen climatologically. And here's an interesting thing: the sea surface temperatures have actually cooled down a bit in the Atlantic, which is interesting. But it's not really enough to cause any problems for tropical storms, because most of the Atlantic is still way above average. You have where a lot of the storms like Hurricane Debbie and Ernesto were, that's cooling down more to average to slightly below average, but still the main development region is above average. The Gulf, Caribbean, all that is way above average. Even further north in the Atlantic is definitely warm enough for hurricanes. Like, you have pretty much the entire Atlantic is definitely favorable, especially as that Caribbean and the Gulf area. That's where some of the strongest systems could intensify pretty quickly from some of the extreme ocean heat content and everything down there. But also, what's cooling down is the Pacific with the La Nina. That we're actually not in a La Nina yet. We're actually in ENSO neutral. And part of the thing is that part of the reason why it might not be so active is because they were thinking that there was going to be a pretty strong La Nina in place for the peak of hurricane season. But it's now we're in only a cool phase of an ENSO neutral. So, and it might go towards a weak La Nina, but really not this strong La Nina that people were thinking was going to supercharge the hurricane season. But the extreme sea surface temperatures and the ocean heat content in the Atlantic should be enough for still rapidly intensifying major hurricanes. Once everything lines up, then we could probably start getting a lot of scary hurricanes. And the ENSO neutral is right now it's basically a quarter of a degree below average. So not even actually, if you average it out over the 15 days, it's pretty much close to just about average, slightly cooler than average, but barely. So technically just an ENSO neutral. And so for the main part of hurricane season, really not even a La Nina at all. So that could have an impact on the hurricane season not being quite as extreme as what it might have seemed like it could have been at first. If right now we were in a strong La Nina, but the upper ocean heat content, the tropical cyclone heat potential is, pretty high, anywhere from 150 to over 200 in the Caribbean and the Gulf and everything like that. So, a hurricane going over that definitely would rapidly intensify. The CFS model is showing that things really heat up by the first week of September. This is showing that, looks like a lot of activity for the first week of September. And then, right now it's not really active, but then September 1st to September 8th, then it gets active for the Caribbean and the southeastern U.S., potentially a tropical storm, maybe a hurricane, and then looks like more fish storm activity from the 8th to the 15th, but still the southeastern U.S. could be pretty wet from either, tropical system or just tropical moisture, but not organized into a tropical storm or hurricane. And then, still active, even September 15th to the 22nd. And then, going later into September, still some storm activity, but this is, of course, further out, so the forecast isn't going to be as, precise at all. But that's kind of the CFS weekly kind of precipitation outlook. And then the actual CFS, this is something interesting. The actual CFS is showing, some weak storm activity going to the beginning of September. And then, and this is not an actual, like, hurricane forecast. It's just showing what the CFS thinks, a general idea of the weather pattern. But it is showing a more impressive, storm activity, maybe, but not like, 7 systems at once or something, but, maybe a bit more active towards, like, mid-September. But then also it's showing, a lot of cold fronts coming down, even snow in Canada and everything, so more of a, fall-like weather pattern, and a lot of cold fronts coming down through the southeastern U.S., so that could actually keep storms from really moving further west and actually keep more of those fish storms happening. We'll have to see. But, that's kind of what the CFS is showing for the next, 30 days. The CFS monthly is showing, activity going through September, in the Caribbean and the Southeast. And then, even October, even November, it still looks like there could be some storms further down in the Caribbean before things, dry out with the possibly a more La Nina pattern. If the La Nina actually ends up happening further, further towards, November, December, January, then maybe more of a La Nina pattern for the southeastern U.S. But here's another thing that, the ENSO neutral versus La Nina has, it kind of is changing some of the models. Like, this is, September on the CANSIPS model, and it shows, it shows some fish storms, it shows some activity in the Caribbean, a lot of activity in the Caribbean and the Southeast, but also more of those fish storms, and then that kind of increases towards October, and then really into November. If anything happens, it would be further out in the Atlantic. But here's actually something interesting, that it's actually shown more fish storms in the newer runs of this model, because it runs like once per month. So back in June, they were thinking, or beginning of July, they were thinking, oh yeah, pretty much the same thing, after we kind of saw that, the La Nina is not looking that impressive, if it happens at all, for the hurricane season. And then in June, they were thinking, maybe more of a La Nina. Even in the spring, they were really thinking more of a La Nina in place, and it was showing more storms headed towards the U.S., and more activity closer to the, Western Caribbean. And then now they're not showing that as quite as much in the newer runs. The pattern has shifted a bit. And even in the Pacific, they're showing actually a little more activity than they previously were. They were showing pretty much nothing in the Eastern Pacific, but now they are showing some activity. So the hurricane season in the Pacific hasn't really been shut down quite as much. At first it looked like it would be, and the Atlantic was just going to be, extremely active. But now it's like not such an extreme difference. Because it actually, even the NMME model has changed as well. So, I think that instead of it being a strong, even a moderate La Nina in place during the hurricane season, now we're in ENSO neutral going into the peak of hurricane season. I think that's changed, you know, some of the model forecasts and everything, but still it could be pretty active, you know, especially in September. I think there's going to be, you know, activity, but, you know, we'll see. And, you know, they're still thinking this is going to be pretty active. Like, the newer forecasts are still showing possibly 23 named storms. Even the National Hurricane Center has kept their original forecast the same, of 17 to 24 named storms, 8 to 13 hurricanes, and 4 to 7 major hurricanes. So, you know, and CSU saying 23 named storms, 12 hurricanes, and 6 major hurricanes. So yeah, I think that, you know, we'll have to see how active it gets. You know, if these forecasts turn out to be actually correct, because there's still, you know, a huge potential for a lot of activity, you know, over the next couple months. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the like button, share the video, comment below, and please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already for more weather information. Extreme Weather Zone, out.